Get everybody situated. All right. All right. Okay, I'm very, very excited for this next panel because working on the Stomp, there are some artists that we have gone looking for to try to get for years, and for years, we had 45s of Mary Jane Hooper, and I would look and go, well, there's no listing for Mary Jane Hooper in the phone book. And then someone eventually figured out that there was a Sena Fletcher was Mary Jane Hooper. And then we looked in the phone book and we couldn't find a New Orleans phone number for that. And I kept looking, and then there was a rumor that she worked for Cox Cable, had worked for Cox. And then lo and behold, there was a Facebook page that we thought I tried that and sent a message. I never heard anything back, and it was just more and more aggravation, and couldn't find Mary Jane Hooper. And I was like, all right, I guess we'll never see Mary Jane Hooper. And then our moderator, this is Neil Pellegrin from WWOZ, calls me one night and says, what do you think about Mary Jane Hooper? And I'm like, you've talked to Mary Jane Hooper? Yeah, she's very nice, and I was going to interview for WWOZ. I'll let you know if she may be interested in the Ponderosa Stomp. I was like, oh yes, that would be great. And we talked to her for a little bit, and finally he said, let me talk to her, and then I called Sena up, and of course it was like the crazy Saturday morning of lead poisoning at work, where gunshots and everything were coming in. So I finally found a break and was able to talk to Sena for a while. And talked to her some more, and she was very nice. She told me her story, and I said, well, that's why I probably had no idea what to think, because she had a very interesting life. But but here she is. Ladies and gentlemen, this is called The Resurrection of Mary Jane Hooper. And here she is, Sena Fletcher, alias Mary Jane Hooper, the unknown funk queen of New Orleans, with Mr. Neil Pellegrin.
All right, well, yeah, it's been a little while since you've done an interview. I mean, you and I did an interview for OZ about a year ago, but before that it had been a while.
Right, it had been a while. First one being with you, right? And that had been a long while, many, many years when I did the last interview with you for WWOZ. So it's good to be here. Thank you all for coming out. Yeah, it's there is a resurrection. He used the right word, because not necessarily incognito, it's just that, just kind of not doing anything specifically for many years in the music business.
So I guess we should maybe start at the beginning, your upbringing, and how you got involved with music at an early age.
Yeah, I did. I grew up in a household, a very musically inclined religious household. My father was a minister. And he had a Baptist minister, a church in New Orleans, also Slidell. And my mother was a Xavier University grad in music. And so she taught us all to play the piano, because that was her thing, that was her forte. She, before she married my father, was from Brobridge and had grown up in that town where my grandfather, her father, was also a minister and a founder of the Bethlehem Baptist Church in Brobridge, which is now on the historical register. So coming from a Baptist family on both sides, mother and father, I was a little kid singing in my father's church in the choir. My mother was playing the piano, my father was preaching the sermons, and all of us did something in some capacity in the church. So from there, being a young kid and growing up in a church, in a Christian household, I mean, my family wasn't too keen on, the music industry, But when I was a young teenager, I thought, I decided, wow, I'm listening to all this great music on the radio. People are telling me in the choir every time I sing and I do a solo, oh, you have, great voice, you need to do something with that. When you hear that over and over, that little seed is planted, and you think, wow, I wonder if I really do have something, and I didn't know what to do with that, but I thought, I need to look into it. So I just kind of inquired around. I mean, the music industry back then, which anybody here would know, was not as big as it is today. I mean, you didn't have social media, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have iTunes, you didn't have those things. So as far as the New Orleans scene, living in the lower Ninth Ward, which is where I resided with, Eddie Bo lived down there, and Lee Dorsey lived down there, and Fats Domino lived around the corner. And I was telling Neil, Fats, we knew the Dominoes very well because we were very close proximity. Plus, he and my mother shared the same birth date, which was February 26th. And his kids and us, we all hung out together. They all had A names, Antoine and Anito, and, we all hung out together. We were all good friends. So, when you're coming up in that environment, you don't really realize or know that, that what you do or the choices you make are going to someday just, become interesting, or iconic even. To some people. So at a very young age, I decided that I was going to kind of check this out and see if I could do anything with this music thing, of which my father, was not for. My mother was a little bit, more supportive. And I remember catching the bus and going up to the, and I don't know, and I think I told you this before, I don't know if that was called C-San or Sansu, because it changed names. But it was with Alan Toussaint and Marshall C. Horn, going up there and saying, I wanted to sing and who I was, and so he played this particular song that he had written. I think it was for Gene Knight at that time, and I knew it very well. I mean, I had been rehearsing and practicing, and from what everybody told me, I didn't even realize when I did this the magnitude of who he was. I mean, I didn't even know how big he was at that time, because I was a teenager and he was in his 20s, I think, at that time, and driving a Rolls Royce then, but I didn't know. I didn't know, And so I sang this song, and he said to me, if anybody ever listened to Alan or how he talked, he had this very soft voice, and he said, lady, if I'd heard you do this song, I would have had you record this song. And it was like the ultimate compliment to me, because you don't know if you're good or not, or until somebody who's in the business doing it every day would do that. So I kind of decided at that point that I wanted to, this might be something that I wanted to pursue, that I might want to do, Yeah. And so that's what kind of kicked it off. Yeah.
And but you didn't actually record any commercial records with Alan at that point, right?
No. He kind of talked my parents into letting him take me into the studio to work with two other really, really talented, brilliantly talented and amazing women, Inez Cheatham and Mercedes Morris. And we would work, and we did a lot of background material mostly. We were learning the studio and how it works, and we were also doing background for different artists, like Johnny Adams, Release Me, was one of the songs, just brilliant talent. And some of the other artists that he had. And so we really formulated this really great sound between the three of us that we thought, everybody was saying, oh God, you guys are great, we want them. So we thought, wow, if we're that good, we need to come up with a name for ourselves, because back then it was like Diana Ross and the Supremes and all this, so Gladys Knight and the Pips, so we need to come up with some name for ourselves. So we came up with the name of Triple Souls. And we were in demand at that time. We did a lot of background things. When we didn't do any particular, we weren't like an independent group out performing, at clubs and things.
Mostly just studio work.
That's studio work, just strictly studio work. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so one of those, the women that you worked with in that group, one has passed away, if I'm not mistaken.
Mercedes,
right?
Mercedes has passed away. Inez is still around. Her father's a minister too, and has a church, and she's involved with that. But I've read so many things on the internet about Inez Cheatham and I being one and the same person. So hopefully today this will dispel that. It's a funny thing. A friend of mine said to me, I think it was back in 2004, an old friend reached out to me and said, oh, wow, and I said, what? And he's telling me all this stuff, and he said, have you ever just Googled your name? And I said, what would I want to do that for? No. I mean, who Googles their own name? Who does that? And he said, well, you need to do it, because you need to see what's out there. So I did. I'm Googling it, and I start reading all this stuff about Inez Cheatham and Sena. And then they said Sena Fletcher, there was, just dead. And I'm thinking, well, you know what? I mean, look, if Mary Jane Hooper and Sena Fletcher are one and the same, and we are, and Sena Fletcher is my real name. It just as Ira was talking, it's not very hard to find me, and and it's like, and it's all this stuff, and I'm saying nobody ever really picked up the phone or Facebook message or reached out to me to ask me whether or not this is true or that's true or did this happen or that happen. And I'm reading all this stuff, and it's saying Eddie Bo even said they're not the same, and he should know. And I'm thinking, how could they even confuse us? Because Inez had this really deep, rich, Gladys Knight type soulful voice, and I had a more higher pitched soprano, type voice. So, but, people just put whatever they think, they put out there, and then it becomes real to a lot of people.
And the rumors just keep multiplying.
Fake news.
Yeah, the rumors just keep multiplying.
They keep, people just keep compounding on the same thing instead of really doing their due diligence, and really, it's not that hard to find some. Neil found me.
Yeah, tracked
he
it.
just
It wasn't
called
that
me
difficult. Up. Yeah, you were in the online white pages.
Yeah, he just called me up one day and said, hey, and introduced himself, and we got together for lunch and talked, and I said, sure, I'd love to do it,
So
come out of my cocoon.
Yeah, I'm glad you did.
Yeah, me too.
How did you go from the Triple Souls to doing some
Thank you.
to doing some solo work on your own?
Well, I was working with the Triple Souls and with Alan, and really learning a lot about the studio. And of course, like anybody at 15, you got it now. You know it, right? You can rule the world. So here I was thinking, oh, I got this. I mean, I don't need him anymore. I could go out on my own, because I was saying, well, I really think I'm ready to do my own solo thing. And he's like, no, lady, you're not. You have to learn that. And I said, oh, man, this is not what I signed up for. I wanted to sing, I want to go perform, I want to do this and that. And so I got annoyed, I got aggravated, and, just thought I knew it all, and decided that I wanted to do something on my own. Well, by that time, because of all the work we had done and the people we had been exposed to, there were a lot of people who knew who we were. And so that's when I kind of hooked up with Eddie Bo. They kind of approached me and said, well, we hear you're looking to do something, and we'll do some solo material on me. I often think about that, because I think, what would have happened had that not happened? Mary Jane Hooper would not exist. I would not be sitting here talking to you today. There would be no songs, or these songs, So everything happens, right? For a reason. It does. So I decided to go into the studio and work with Eddie Bo and Oscar Musa and do some things. And so all of the songs on the CD that was released back in '97, all of those songs were songs that we did in studio. And it's probably not all of the songs, because I can tell you we were in Cosmo Matossa's studio just about every day. We were doing something. If it wasn't working on doing background for somebody, we were working on material for me and recording that material, every single day. And I loved it, because it was great thing for me to be, putting my art, so to speak, to the test, and see if I really had what it took, and if I could really deliver, And I worked with a great group of people, Eddie Bo being one, who was just an amazing motivator, an amazing writer, producer, arranger, composer, extraordinaire. And being so young, you needed that guidance. You needed somebody to not just motivate you, but to know how to talk to you when you got in your little bratty, ways. I don't want to do this anymore, I'm tired, to just know how to talk to you and to, to motivate you, So we had a lot of fun in the studio, a lot of jokes, a lot of the musicians that we talked about. I mean, I feel as though I was so blessed to work with the caliber of musicians that I work with. You know, George Davis, George French, George Porter, Dave Bartholomew, Ellis Marcellus, George Plummer, who came up with the name Mary Jane Hooper, actually.
Yeah, you mind telling us that story?
No, that you know, that was because when I was leaving trying to get out of the contract with Alan. And please understand, Alan was upset with me for quite a while, but we were very, 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 very good friends. So we, you know, we got over that. He got over that with me. But I was trying to get out of the contract because I saw this opportunity before me, you know, to do my own material. And so we had been doing some things, but I couldn't use my real name, right? Because I was still under contract with them. And I finally did break the contract under the fact that I wasn't fully emancipated at the time of signature. But in the interim, you know, when the whole thing, they wanted a soul version of Harper Valley PTA, I couldn't do it because I was under this contract. And so George Plummer, who's still around today playing, I ran into him really not too long ago. We're talking now, we've reconnected, but he came up, we were like, well, we have to just come up with this bogus name. And so he came up with the name of Mary Jane Hooper because Mary Jane, back in those days, stood for marijuana. And a lot of the musicians smoked marijuana, along with other things. And I was not one of them. You know, I never did drug. I was a preacher's daughter. And the other one was Hooper, and that meant, the word hoop meant you can sing. You know, you really can hoop. That was the slang back in the day. So that became my name, Mary Jane Hooper. And we thought, you know, in doing Harper Valley PTA that, you know, this would be like a short-lived kind of thing because, you know, we'd do this one song and then that would be it. But
and
then
go back to your real name.
Go back to my real name, but that didn't happen because all of a sudden Mary Jane Hooper took off, and you know, I thought, hey, the man upstairs must be what he wants me to say. So, but I figure I'm in good company. You know, I'm MJ, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan. You know, everybody calls me MJ. I'm like, hey, you know, that's good company.
So most of the recordings that you made as Mary Jane Hooper, I'm assuming those were done at Cosmo's Camp Street studio, Jazz City?
Right, it was.
On Camp Street, which was his third studio. And but can you tell us about some of your other recordings that you made with Eddie Bo for Scram Records, and maybe how you hooked up with Al Scramuzza? Or I guess Eddie was working with him.
Well, Eddie was already working with Al Scramuzza, so I worked with Eddie a lot. Of course, I met with Al Scramuzza. He was the money guy behind the whole thing and the producer of everything ultimately. But I didn't deal with him that much on a musical basis, you know, because I was in studio so much or touring or whatever. So I was mostly dealing with Eddie most of the time, as opposed to Al Scramuzza. You know, so. A lot of as you said, most of those, just about all of those recordings really were done at Cosmo's, at Camp Street Studio. Yeah, and we were there just about every day, you know, pumping out. So Eddie wrote a lot of songs. I don't know how many people in here know, but Eddie Bo pumped out songs all the time. I have to tell you, I had dinner with Eddie Bo 6 months before he died, and we sat down and we listened to the CD. The one that came out in '97, and we were joking because I said, "Do you remember doing these songs?" And we just listened to it, and he said to me the ultimate compliment. He said, "You know, after all this time," he said, "I listened to you sing those songs, and you were so young." And he said, "There's a lot of very talented singers today that couldn't do those riffs today, you know." And I said, "Wow, you think so?" I said, "You know, I wonder if I could duplicate that, you know, at this point in my life." But yeah, it was, and it just got me to thinking, you know, about how short, because all of the people that, not all of them, but a lot of them that I learned from were, mentored me, you know, Alan Toussaint, Eddie Bo, Lee Dorsey I toured with, and are all gone now. So, yeah, it's very sad. Very,
So
very sad.
did Harper Valley PTA get a pretty good amount of airplay here?
Right,
on the
Harper
on
Valley
the,
PTA
local
did. It
station?
was interesting because they wanted a soul version of that particular song, you know, Jeannie C. Riley song, Harper Valley PTA. So they wanted a soul version of it. It came out really well, I think, and they were very happy with it. So yeah, it did get a decent amount. You know, it's hard for me to remember everything about that, about all the airplay that every song got during that particular time, but it did. It was very popular. So Mary Jane Hooper, you know, was born from that song, and yeah.
And how did your parents feel at this point once you started releasing records? Were they a little more supportive? Or?
Yeah, you know, my mother was, you know, both my parents were supportive, but my mother was certainly more supportive than my father was. I mean, it's not that he was not supportive, he just would have preferred if I had done gospel, you know, as opposed to rock and roll, R&B, funk, that kind of thing. So,
and I
yeah.
assume you still did some singing in the church
Oh,
even
yeah.
while you were recording.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't do any gospel recordings, but I did do singing in the church. And so went on and doing all of that stuff. And then, of course, I don't know, many people here may know the story about how I ended up leaving, you know, that because of and it's true, you know, when Teach Me came out, the song Teach Me,
That was your biggest?
one of the the biggest. And Jerry Wexler, who was then executive vice president of Atlantic Records, who produced Aretha Franklin, had reached out to Al Scamuza about buying out my contract. Now you have to understand, at Cosmo Matassa Studio, which was like really the only game in town, but it was a great setup. All these things were done there. So I mean, it didn't cost that much money, really, to do those recordings there. So Jerry Wexler had reached out to Al Scamuza saying he wanted to buy out my contract for a substantial amount of money. And he wanted to move me to New York. He felt that he could make me a national, international star. He loved the song Teach Me and all of this. I didn't know these conversations at that time was going on, but I happened to be in Al's office one day. The phone rang. I answered the phone. And it was Jerry Wexler. And so he told me the story about what was going on, what was happening, his conversations. He was getting a little disillusioned because he didn't feel that they were getting anywhere. So he said, look, you know, if you ever get out of that contract, break the contract, if you need my help, I'm here for you. You know, this is what I'd like to do. I'd like to bring you to New York, blah, 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 blah. So that was very disheartening to me, and it kind of reverted back to some of the things my father had said, and he was afraid of, you know, you're swimming with the sharks, you know, kind of speak, because I was young, I was naive, and I did put my trust into people. You know, I always like to believe the best and good in people until they show me a reason not to. You know, I don't want to be judgmental and say everybody's this way, or to lose faith and hope and love and trust in people. And so I did trust, you know, them. And I'm not trying to say they're bad people. I'm not trying to say Al Scamuza is a bad person, because he's not. You know, he's a very good person. He had such a strong passion for the music business. It's just that I know he felt he was doing the right thing by playing this game with Jerry Wexler, but my thinking on it was he wasn't, because if he had let me go, right, then perhaps that would have opened up the door for him for all of the other artists, right, that he would have. It would be an easier thing. But once he played this game with these multi-billionaire people, they're friends. Even though they're on different record labels, they start shutting the door down on you. They just make a phone call and nobody will talk to you after that. And so that's kind of what happened with him. But ultimately, I didn't go to New York because, well, one thing, my parents wouldn't let me. You know, they were like, no, no way, you can forget about it. You're not, you know, I didn't know anybody there. I didn't have any family there. So it was a moot point anyway. So I didn't get to go to New York. But I mean, I did continue to work with them until I just kind of decided to walk away from it and just not do anything. You know, not do anything with them. I did continue, you know, there's a lot of things being written that I walked away from the music business. I really didn't. I walked away from that group. But I did continue on in the music business, but under my own name. I I worked with my brother, who was one of the most gifted piano players ever in the history of piano playing. And
would you remind us of his name or tell us?
Raymond Fletcher, who was tragically killed by a drunk driver in 2012 on the way to a gig in the French Quarter. He was very well recognized for his work. He was so gifted and talented. He has received a proclamation from the New Orleans City Council for the Jazz and Heritage Festival. He was good friends with Cedric the Entertainer. Deacon John was a good friend of my brother's. They worked together, and when he passed away, his services was more like a concert. I received a call from the Grammy Awards, who got involved in his funeral, from my brother. He was so well loved and respected, in the music industry. And then his daughter as well was, her name was Renetta, but she was known as Magnolia Shorty. She was a rap artist. She was tragically killed in 2010, and she was under contract. She grew up with Lil Wayne. I think everybody knows who Lil Wayne is. He was at the services sitting directly behind me. In actuality, he paid for her funeral services. Her career was taking off in rap music. She had signed with Cash Money Records. So, it's a very musical, she didn't steal it, right? Because after she was so tragically killed, and not on purpose, it was on the news for like a week, where she was giving a friend a ride home who had just gotten out of jail. And as she entered the gated community of her apartment, 2 guys jumped on the car and murdered them, but the contract was out on him. And they didn't know it was her. So they did K2 Records out of New York did a documentary on her life, in which they reached out to me because I had pictures of my brother that I could supply to them. They wanted to know about the family, the musical background, the history, that sort of thing too. So I did want to go back for a second to the musicians, because one of the
a lot of them you weren't necessarily in the studio because you overdubbed.
Exactly, we did. Sometimes I was in the studio, sometimes not. Sometimes different parts were laid down, tracks at different times. And of course, I mentioned some of the names of the people, but and also I worked with Wardell, because he did some production as well for me. And but I think James Black. But for anybody in the room I was like a huge fan of James Black. And James Black is just about on all of my material. He was my session drummer, and the song Psychedelphia.
He wrote that.
He wrote it, and I was just so blessed to be able to record that particular song. And I really do. I'm sincere when I say, if you listen to it, you kind of think of Hair. You think of this Broadway show, and I really think that song, based on that song, it could be made into a phenomenal Broadway. Psychedelphia is the song I'm talking about.
That with you in mind.
He wrote that song, yeah. Well, that's what he told me anyway. There's a couple of stories out there about, that was a drug trip. It probably was, whatever. But I know what he told me, that he wrote that with me in mind. There's a place out in space, let's all go.
Should we hear a little bit of it?
Music's cool, lights are low, no, no, no. And I'm thinking, where am I in those words? I keep listening, I don't know. But that was James Black, sure.
We'll just hear a little bit of Psychedelphia by Mary Jane Hooper.
Mask inside out and upside down, electric bass to inner space, head going round and around and around and around. Psychedelphia, psychedelphia, got to be near. Hear the sound, look around, see no town, no one here.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Psychedelia. And that's a tune that wasn't even released.
It was
at the
not
time.
released. The CD that was put out in '97 was called Psychedelphia, and rightfully so, because it's, I mean, it's an amazing song. It really is an amazing song. And I mean, just, when I listen to that song, you may or may not believe this, but I listen to the drums more. I'm not really listening to myself so much as I'm listening to this amazing, gifted, beyond gifted, brilliant drummer. That was my drummer. I mean, that's like, I was so in awe of the talent of James Black. And I mean, I'm sure everybody knows James Black has a cult following worldwide. I mean, he truly was, in my opinion, the Jimi Hendrix of drum. Not to take anything away from Smokey Johnson, because I worked with Smokey Johnson too, who was just another, I heard Deacon John at another panel before mine talking about him. And I mean, it's just hard to believe for me. I was just so fortunate and so lucky to be working with the people that I work with. I was never a struggling artist. I was never a starving artist. I was so gifted to be able to, or lucky to be able to work with people like Alan Toussaint and Eddie Bow and Willie T.
At such a young age and just
At
starting
such
out
a young
to work
age
with
and
those
just starting
giants.
out and have all these, big brothers, if you want to call them that, protecting me and looking out for me and guiding me and mentoring me, so yeah.
And as far as Teach Me, did that make a national impact?
Teach Me was just a beautiful song written by Eddie Bow, and it did very, very well. That was the song that actually prompted the phone call from Jerry Wexler to Al Scramuzza, was that particular song. It was extremely popular. I think it could have been a lot bigger than what it was if it had gotten the right push. And I think that obviously if it had been under in the hands of people like Jerry Wexler and Atlantic Records at the time, it would have gotten that push, so unfortunately.
I did find out that it was released in Jamaica back at the time.
Yeah.
In '69, you caught that one.
Right, in '69 and in Jamaica, and that's interesting.
Teach Me, yeah. So, did you do any touring after that song started to get some airplay and get popular?
I did. I spent so much time in the studio recording stuff. I did do a whole lot of touring, but I did some of it, sporadically. Yeah.
And do you remember some of the guys who were on the road with you? Were you with other artists and you were using their backup?
Well,
band,
I toured with Lee Dorsey. It was more because he was, an international star that was founded by Alan Toussaint and had some really big, if anybody knows, hit records. Right. And in working with him, I mean, most of the musicians were musicians catered more to him and his music. Okay. Yeah.
So were you kind of like an opening act for him? Or?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, as far as touring Mary Jane Hooper alone by herself, no, I didn't do a lot of that. Yeah.
So you kind of got a little disillusioned with the music business at that point because of the whole Jerry Wexler thing?
Yeah, I did, and just kind of decided that I wanted to do other things, so I just kind of take a break from it and just kind of sort through it and figure out. And once I did, I kind of, through some mutual friends, hooked up with a band called Q, which was kind of cool. It was in the 70s. It was a group of guys, 15 guys, right, all white. The only girl was me, and the only black person in the group. And we just thought that was so cool. Yeah, so all these guys playing Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Cold Blood and the music of the 70s, Chicago, and they were great. They were a phenomenal band, and I decided to work with that particular band. And the band was already formulated. They were doing very well. I worked, I always did all kinds of genre of music. I mean, I can tell you right now, one of the people to this day, my son will tell you, he got so sick of hearing and still gets sick of hearing if I play it today, is Gino Vanelli. I'm a huge Gino Vanelli fan. And I just, I've always liked all kinds of music and listened to all kinds of music. So, yeah,
And where did you play with the Q?
Well, we worked at places all around the country. We did the Ivanhoe, which was very popular in the 70s, which was always jam-packed. I remember it was a club called OD's, I think, on Harvard University's campus. We played up there a lot. We did toured all around the country. And then Clyde Abercrombie and Paul Yasich were producer and director of the NBC affiliate here, WWOZ TV. And they were big fans, and so they would come out all the time, and they said, hey, how would you guys like to have your own show for a season? We were like, cool, absolutely. So Pontchartrain Beach was still in existence at the time, so what we did was we did some shooting out there, for that. And we had our own show on for a while, but we did,
kind of
yeah, it was kind of exciting. We did a lot of touring. We were on the road all the time, very popular band, very, very great band. And then I also, in the 70s, worked at one of the guys who was involved in my career with the Q, not with Mary Jane Hooper, was Otto Gessel. He was known as the guru of radio. Brilliant man, had 3 degrees from Stanford, Yale, and Oxford. And his father was actually the brewmeister for Jack's Brewery, Joe Gessel. And so we were good friends, and he had said, well, why don't you come work with me? Take a little break, come work with me. So WTX Radio, which was the radio station in the 70s, CHR Top 40, I went there to work with him, and he became my mentor and kind of taught me about the radio business, because he knew all about the radio business. And so Bob Mitchell, who's still on the air today, now on WWLAM Radio, was the program director at the time. And he had asked me if I would like to maybe take a stab at doing the news, because he thought I had a good speaking voice and my entertainment and all that. So I said, sure. So I ended up doing the news. I ended up having my own radio show on WTIX-AM. Joe Collada used to have a show called Let's Talk It Over. And then I had my own show where I would interview people who would come in town sometimes, at the Blue Room, or I interviewed, like Ben Johnson, I remember was a country and western star. I interviewed Ms. Lillian, because they were named Jimmy Carter, President Carter's mother, and different other people who would come into town. And then we also interviewed Muhammad Ali when he fought Leon Spinks. We had a statewide network set up where we did it at our radio station. And yeah, so that was kind of cool. He came in, and I was like, who didn't love Muhammad Ali? You either loved him or you hated him, right? But, he was just such a great fighter. And I remember having my son and him coming in, and he had his whole entourage with him and his wife, and he said, he got off the elevator, and my son was so little, and he said, do you mind if I take him with me, Mama? And I said, no. So this huge guy, and he picked him up, and he did the interview, which I didn't conduct the interview. I was part of it, the whole thing of it, but this other guy conducted the interview, and my son was on his lap the whole time. So it was on the 10 o'clock news, and he was excited, calling all his friends, saying, watch the 10 o'clock news and all that, So that was a big thing for me, to get to meet Muhammad Ali.
And how long did you have your show on radio?
I worked at the radio station 9 years, a lot longer than I planned to do, but my big claim to fame in radio was, are you ready for this? In 1978, when Elvis Presley died, I broke that story in New Orleans. The reason was wrong, but he was dead. It came across, and we had little ticker tapes, back then, came across that Elvis Presley had died. And I was like, oh, get him first, ratings. So, you wanted to break the news first, and it said Elvis Presley had died of colon cancer. So that's what I reported. and of course he was dead. That was the only thing that was right about that story. But we all know, but I mean, he was dead, but he didn't die of colon cancer. But I actually got to break that story before everybody else. So that's my claim to fame. I don't know.
Well, people may remember that.
Yeah, I may remember that. So, well, yeah, I mean, I remember I was it 1978, the same year, I was in an automobile accident. I watched a man die in my car. We were hit by a drunk driver, and there were 13 cop cars on the scene because it was on the news that I had been in this accident, and my name was known from doing the news. And so all these police officers knew my name, so they were all showing up for that. And so after 9 years of working for that, I also worked at, I was vice president of an advertising agency for 15 years. I wore hats. I was a corporate controller there and for 15 years. And then I was a senior marketing consultant for Cox Communications. And so that's where I retired from when did I retire? 2012. Yeah. So that's been kind of what's going on with me.
Oh, it's been a little while since you've been involved in the music business.
Involved in the music business, directly. I mean, I've kept in touch with some people like Willie T, and Alan.
You recorded a session with.
I did do. I've got this whole box like that of tapes, and I'm going through them, but they're the reel to reel. And so my neighbor ironically had one. I was shocked, but then I shouldn't be because he's a physicist, and physicists are weird. And they have weird things. And so I was talking to George, and I said, I got to find this. He said, oh, I have one. Uh-huh. And I said, cool, I can borrow it. So he's letting me use it. And I've had it for months now. But I'm trying to little by little go through, and I'm finding some of the old interviews that I did on the radio, and I'm trying to bring them into today's format, and I'm finding.
That's a great tune you recorded with Willie too.
But the music that I did with Willie T.
That wasn't released. Yeah.
That was never released. Yeah, he had. It was funny because I hadn't talked to him in a while, and I was working at WTX, and I was walking down Carondelet Street, and I think it was 332 Carondelet Street, and he pulled up, and he said, "Oh wow, man, I've been looking for you." He had cut some deal with a record label in California, and he wanted me to record me. So we did. We went in Studio in the Country in Bogalusa, and we did some things together. And but that was never released. And I know a lot of that was destroyed because Willie's home was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. And he was displaced, and I believe he did go up north, where he was kind of like a honorary professor of music at Princeton for a while until he was able to come back down here.
And
so
fortunately, you had a backup copy. So.
Yeah, fortunately, I did have a backup copy of that, and some of the things that I did with my brother as well. Yeah. So
some
those
more great recordings.
Those are some things that was kind of like the format of like jazz standards that we did at the Monteleone Hotel when we worked together there, and some of the Willie T's things as well. So I may very well have more of that stuff. I'm just little by little kind of going through it.
Yeah. Well, I think we've kind of gone through quite a bit. So
yeah.
Is there anything else you may want to mention in closing?
No.
That we didn't cover? Or?
I don't know.
Think we got
I can't think of anything, huh?
Think we got it pretty well?
I think pretty much, yeah. I don't know if anybody, do we have time for questions or
do we have a couple of minutes for questions? Yeah, a couple of questions.
Okay, couple.
Anybody? Okay.
Were you and Eddie Bo happy when the CD and LP came out 20 years ago?
You're talking about the Psychedelphia CD in '97 when it came out?
Yes.
I wasn't happy about the manner in which that whole deal went down, to be perfectly candid, because Al Skramuza contacted me after he had cut the deal with the producer in New York, and I did have a music attorney involved, and he said they wanted to do the right thing by me, but I would say to do the right thing by me, you would have contacted me before you cut the deal, okay? And then that would have put me in a much better negotiating, bargaining position as opposed to after you. Al Skramuza owned the masters, and even though his warehouse had a fire, and everything was destroyed. For some reason, my masters were in a vault that wasn't affected. And so he was able to wait for the statute of limitation on my contract to run out and then cut this deal with this producer in New York to put it out. So no, we were not happy about it. Nobody I know, I'm not the only person this has happened to. It's happened to Eddie, it's happened to Willie T, it's happened to Alan and others. And so no, nobody was, and all, let's just say, with the same company with regard to the producer in New York. So, yeah.
All right. Anybody else? No? I guess that means we covered it pretty well.
That's a wrap. All right,
That's a wrap.
thank you all for coming out. Thank you.